5,000 soldiers. 2 nations. 30 years. They never caught him. His Apache name was Goyaałé, one who yawns. To his family he was a son, a husband, a father. To his enemies he would become something else entirely. Mexican soldiers, hearing his war cry and watching him fight, gave him a new name: Geronimo. For 3 decades, this one man made the most powerful army on earth look helpless. He escaped capture 47 documented times. He was hunted across deserts, mountains, and international borders. And the story of how he did it begins with a massacre. Title card: Geronimo, the Apache warrior who escaped capture 47 times. The land came first. Before forts, before telegraphs, before borders on maps, there was the Apache homeland, a world of mountains, canyons, and deserts stretching across what is now Arizona and New Mexico, and down into northern Mexico. Hot days. Cold nights. Harsh country, if you didn't know its secrets. But to the Apache it was home. They were semi-nomadic people. They moved with the seasons, following game, water, and opportunity. They raided, they traded, they made alliances, and they made enemies. To survive here, you needed to know the land like a member of your own family. Where water hid in the rocks after a brief rain. Which canyon offered a shadowed path even in the heat of day. Which mountain pass could carry you safely, and which one was a trap. This was the world that shaped Goyaałé. He was born into the Bidonko band of the Chiricahua Apache, in what is now western New Mexico. As a boy he learned to ride, to track, to hunt. He learned to move silently over rock and sand. He learned that in this land hesitation could kill you. Life was hard, but it was theirs. And then everything began to change. In the south, the government of Mexico was tired of Apache raids into its territory. In the north, the United States was expanding west, planting forts and settlements deeper into Apache lands. 2 nations. 1 people caught in the middle. To Mexican officials, Apaches were a problem to be removed. To U.S. officials, they were an obstacle to be pacified. To the Apache, both flags meant the same thing: armies, settlers, broken agreements, and fewer safe places to go. But for young Goyaałé, before the world knew him as Geronimo, this war between nations was still just the background noise of life. He married. He had children. He became a warrior, not yet famous, not yet legendary, but respected among his people. He was not a chief. He did not sit in council making decisions for the tribe. He was a man with a family doing what he had been taught to do: protect them and provide. No one could have known that fate was about to take that life and turn it into something new and terrifying. The year was 1851. Goyaałé and other Apache men had traveled south into Mexico to trade. They left behind their camp, their wives, their children, their elders, expecting to return as they always did. They did not know that Mexican soldiers were nearby. They did not know that a column of armed men was already riding toward their home. The attack came while the warriors were gone. The soldiers rode in hard. There were no Apache war parties waiting for them. Only women tending fires. Children playing. Elders resting in the shade. The soldiers opened fire anyway. Shots. Screams. Smoke. When the warriors returned, they did not find a camp. They found silence. Bodies on the ground. Ash where there had been homes. Among the dead were Goyaałé's mother, his wife, his 3 young children. In that moment, something inside him broke. Grief. Rage. A wound so deep that it would never close. The man called Goyaałé stood in the ruins of his life, and something new was born in his place. From that day forward he was not just a warrior. He was a man with nothing left to lose. If you want to understand the legend of Geronimo, you start here. With a father burying his children. After the massacre, Goyaałé joined raiding parties into Mexico with a fury that even other Apaches noticed. He sought out soldiers whenever he could. He attacked those he held responsible for the death of his family. In battle he showed no fear. He charged when others held back. He fought on when others fell. Mexican troops began to hear his name. They began to fear his sudden, relentless attacks. And in moments of shock and terror, some of them cried out to a saint, Geronimo, calling on Saint Jerome for protection. The name stuck. Geronimo. The world would remember that name. It would forget the quieter one he was born with. As the years passed, another force pressed in, the United States Army. Forts appeared in the desert. Cavalry patrols rode deeper into Apache lands. Settlers carved out ranches and towns. For U.S. commanders, Geronimo was not yet the great symbol of resistance he would become. He was one leader among many in a larger conflict with the Apache people. But the harder the armies pushed, the more one thing became obvious. This man was hard to catch. The first documented attempt to capture Geronimo came in 1858. U.S. forces believed they had him. They had tracked his band. They knew the general area. They moved in ready to close the net. And then he was gone. He slipped into the mountains like smoke through fingers. The soldiers were left combing canyons and arroyos, chasing echoes. In 1861 they tried again. Another expedition. More men. Better information. They tightened the circle. This time they thought there was no way out. Geronimo vanished into Mexico. In 1863 they closed in again. They declared him surrounded. Officers wrote confident letters. This time they said the famous raider was done. He was not done. He was not even there by the time they arrived. Each time the pattern repeated. The army would corner him, announce victory, and then somehow, he was gone. This wasn't luck. It was skill. And as the years went by, that skill only sharpened. To understand how Geronimo escaped capture 47 times, you have to understand the battlefield he chose. The land itself. He knew every canyon in the Sierra Madre. Every narrow pass in the desert. Every spring and hidden pool that meant life or death. He had grown up in this land not as a visitor but as a part of it. Where a soldier from the east might see only empty desert, he saw a map. A line of low hills that could hide riders for miles. A dry wash that, if followed, led to water. A patch of scrub that signaled a hidden seep under the soil. His band could ride 50 miles in a day through terrain that broke horses and men who didn't know its secrets. When the army sent out heavy columns with wagons and supplies, those columns were slow. Geronimo's people were not. They traveled light, living off the land and their knowledge of it. But his true genius was not just in endurance. It was in confusion. He knew the one thing the army needed most, clear tracks to follow. So he took that away from them. When he moved with his people, he often refused to march in one group. Instead, he split his band into pairs or trios. Each small group took a different path, leaving a different trail. Imagine you're an army scout. You come to a point in the desert and see not one trail of hoof prints and footprints, but 5. Which one is Geronimo? Which ones are decoys? Choose wrong and you waste days, maybe weeks, following the wrong group. Sometimes the trail would simply stop. Geronimo and his people would carefully move onto bare rock, scattering or smoothing signs behind them. To a scout, it looked as if they had simply vanished into thin air. While soldiers combed the area, staring at stones and dust, Geronimo was already 2 days away, pushing hard in the opposite direction. He also chose his moments carefully. He attacked when he was least expected. A ranch that believed the army had secured the region. A supply train moving through what officers called a safe pass. A camp where weary soldiers finally felt they could relax. He would strike fast, take horses, food, weapons, and then be gone before reinforcements could even saddle up. He turned every advantage the army believed it had against them. Over time, the hunt for Geronimo became something larger than a single campaign. It became an obsession. The U.S. Army threw men and money at the problem. Over the span of 3 decades, more than 5,000 soldiers took part in operations to capture or kill him. On the other side of the border, Mexican forces hunted him as well. His band? Never more than a few dozen warriors at their peak. Often fewer. At one point, Geronimo commanded fewer than 40 fighting men. Think about that ratio. Thousands of soldiers. Fortresses, telegraphs, railroads, supply depots. Against a few dozen men moving through mountains and desert, guided only by knowledge and will. General George Crook, one of the most respected Indian fighting officers in the U.S. Army, failed to bring him in for good. General Nelson Miles, who replaced Crook, also failed, again and again. Every time they thought they had finally trapped Geronimo, he slipped away. Report after report went back east. Campaign after campaign ended the same way. Geronimo escaped. It was embarrassing. It was infuriating. And slowly it became something else. It became a legend. When people can't explain someone, they start to call them supernatural. As the failures piled up, stories began to spread among the rank and file. They said Geronimo could see the future. How else could he avoid ambushes that had been planned in secret, days ahead? They said he was immune to bullets. Some swore they'd seen him shot, only for him to keep fighting, seemingly untouched. They said he could walk through army camps at night without being seen, moving like a shadow between sleeping men. Around campfires where fear has time to grow teeth, the stories got wilder. Some claimed he had special medicine, powerful protective rituals that made him invincible. Some claimed the desert itself protected him, hiding him from any eye that meant him harm. The truth was less magical, but no less impressive. He was not a ghost. He was a man. A man who had spent his entire life reading the land the way others read books. A man who understood how soldiers thought, how they moved, and how to use that against them. A man so hardened by loss that fear, the thing that makes people hesitate and die, had burned out of him. He was also not alone. He had skilled warriors at his side. He had families depending on him. He had allies and informants who carried news of troop movements and plans. But to the soldiers chasing him, it was easier to call him something other than human. Because if he was just a man, then what did that say about their long-repeated failure to catch him? By the mid-1880s, time was catching up with everyone. Geronimo was older. The world around him was changing. More settlers. More forts. More patrols. By 1885, he and a small group of followers broke away from the reservation yet again, refusing to accept life under tight control. They headed south into their old haunts across the border. The U.S. government, determined to end this problem once and for all, launched what would become the final campaign to bring him in. Thousands of soldiers, Apache scouts, Mexican troops, all working, sometimes together, sometimes separately, to hunt one small, elusive band. It was a brutal game of cat and mouse. Geronimo's people were constantly on the move, dodging patrols, living rough off the land. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and getting worn down. For the U.S. Army, this was expensive and embarrassing. For the followers of Geronimo, it was exhausting and deadly. By 1886, despite all of his skill, Geronimo could not hide one thing. His people were tired. The children were thin. The women were worn down. Even his warriors were feeling the strain of constant flight. General Nelson Miles, now in command, changed tactics. He used relentless pursuit, yes, but he also used messages. He sent word offering terms. Surrender and your people will live. Keep fighting and they will all die, not just the warriors but the families with them. It was not a simple choice. For decades, Geronimo's refusal to quit had kept his people free, at least partially, in their own way on their own land. But now, every day of freedom cost blood. Every escape meant more hunger, more risk, more graves. Geronimo agreed to meet. Picture it, September 4, 1886. The desert is hot. The air is heavy with dust. On one side, U.S. officers and soldiers, confident they represent inevitable victory. On the other, a small group of Apaches who have spent years outrunning death. Geronimo rides in. This is the man who has been hunted across two nations for 30 years. The man whose name has become a curse and a prayer on soldiers' lips. The man they could never seem to catch. He talks. He listens. He weighs more than his own fate. Because now it is not only his life on the line. It is the lives of everyone still following him, everyone who still believes in him. In the end, he makes a decision. He surrenders. Not because they ran him down in battle. Not because they finally surprised him in his sleep. Not because they outsmarted him. He surrenders because the price of not surrendering has become too high for his people. On that day, the army got the one thing it had wanted for decades. Geronimo in their hands, alive. Newspapers would call it a victory. Posters and articles would say they had captured the most famous Apache warrior. But listen closely to the truth in the story. They did not ride him down like game. They did not drag him from a cave in chains. He walked in under his own power. He chose to stop running. He was never truly caught. When Geronimo agreed to surrender, the U.S. government made promises. He and his people were told they would be held in exile for a time, 2 years, and then allowed to return to their beloved homeland in Arizona. It was a lie. Instead, they were shipped east as prisoners of war. First to Florida, where the humid, swampy climate was as alien to them as the surface of the moon. Disease swept through the camps. People who had survived decades of desert warfare now felt a sickness and despair. Later, some were moved to Alabama. Then to what is now Oklahoma. The years went by. The promise of return to Arizona faded, then vanished entirely. Geronimo never saw his homeland again. The warrior who had known every secret spring and canyon of the Southwest now lived under guard, far from the mountains and deserts that had shaped him. But in this strange, unwanted exile, something unexpected happened. Geronimo became famous. In the United States imagination, the Wild West was closing. Frontier wars were ending. The open range was being fenced off. Railroads and telegraphs tied the coasts together. People in cities back east grew fascinated by the very thing their nation had just crushed. The old, wild frontier and the people who had resisted its advance. And who better to symbolize that than Geronimo? He had been their great enemy. Now, safely imprisoned, he could be turned into a spectacle. He was displayed at fairs and expositions. People lined up to see the famous Apache warrior with their own eyes. They bought photographs of him. They paid for his autograph. He rode in Theodore Roosevelt's inaugural parade in 1905, sitting on horseback as the crowd cheered and stared. The government got what it wanted. Geronimo not as a free warrior but as a tamed symbol, proof that the frontier was over and that the United States had won. But fame is not freedom. Behind the handshakes and photographs, Geronimo was still a prisoner of war. He still lived under military control at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. He still dreamed of the mountains and deserts he would never see again. The land that had made him who he was forever out of reach. By 1909, Geronimo was an old man. He had outlived many of the generals who had tried to hunt him. He had seen the world change around him in ways that would have been unimaginable when he was a boy among the Bidanko. He was 79 years old when he lay dying at Fort Sill. In the end, there were no crowds, no parades, no cheering. Just an old warrior far from home with his memories. He turned to his nephew and spoke words that would echo long after his death. "I should have never surrendered. I should have fought until I was the last man alive." It is a haunting confession. Did he regret choosing his people's survival over endless resistance? Did he feel that by surrendering he had allowed the very thing he spent his life resisting to win? We cannot know exactly what was in his heart. But we know this. Even at the end, he did not speak like a man who viewed himself as defeated. Geronimo died in 1909 and was buried at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. But his story did not end there. He had escaped capture 47 times. He had made the most powerful armies of two nations look clumsy and blind. He had fought for 30 years not just as a warrior, but as a symbol of a people refusing to vanish quietly. Today his name is still shouted by soldiers and paratroopers jumping from airplanes. Geronimo. A battle cry, a word of courage borrowed from a man they once hunted as an enemy. There is a certain irony in that. The same military that once threw thousands of men at him now uses his name as a symbol of bravery. His story is complicated. He was not a perfect hero. He was not a simple villain. He was a man shaped by tragedy and war, making choices in a world that offered him few good options. But his legacy endures. For many, he represents resistance against overwhelming odds. A refusal to bow, even when the price of standing is high. The idea that even the mightiest power can be made to look foolish by those who know their own ground and refuse to quit. The official records say he surrendered. The reports say he was captured. But if you listen to the story closely, a different picture emerges. For 30 years they hunted him. They chased his shadow across deserts and mountains. They threw 5,000 soldiers at a band that could fit into a small room. They never caught him. In the end, he chose to walk in under his own power. He chose to lay down his weapons. He chose for his people to stop running. He let them take him. And there is a difference. Because some men cannot be caught. They can only decide to stop running.